And welcome to another episode.
Wait. We just got done doing this. What are you talking about? This is not another episode of In Black and White. I can't do this all night long with you. This can't
Dude, we can do it all day. But you're right. I made a mistake.
Yeah, this isn't In Black and White. What are you doing?
We're on the wrong show. Crap. All right. Let me get the 13% on. Sorry about that.
Get the 13% on.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, hold on. Why am I saying In Black and White when we're supposed to be doing the 13%?
Okay,
Hey.
that's total white boy failure on my part.
You know, I think we have to take one for the team.
And this is the problem with white supremacy.
This is the problem with white supremacy. Oh, this is what happens.
Oh, dear my.
So, hey, listen, this is the old YFNA News Connection family. I heard you all have a really great show coming up tonight, though.
We do.
Is it
We
in
do.
black and white?
See?
No, it's like right now it's
it's
like
after In
20%.
Black and White.
See
No,
that?
right.
It's like 20.5% right now.
Right. It's like
And
20.5%.
we're still waiting on Ethan's ancestry.com to come back.
Right.
I got some questions about him.
Yeah, we got some questions about Ethan's 23andMe.
Richard is convinced he's got to get him one of them Harold's gift cards or Popeye's chickens or cake. I don't know which one it was. Hey, but you know, we had a great show. We got a chance to talk a little bit about attacking white supremacy and didn't really dive into a lot of that, but we did get a chance. Systemic racism in the systems that are set up by bipartisan. And I really had a great guest on with Atiba from WVON's the Buchanan and Seton show. Yeah, he tried to show me up with his radio voice, and I personally am petitioning that he not return because I don't want him putting me out of work. But I'm interested to hear what you guys got coming up here on YFNA News.
Well, he did kind of put you out of commission, Rick. I'm so sorry, but
my God, that's not true.
It's a practice radio voice. I'm sorry, fam, but yeah,
he's been doing it longer. He's good his age. He's got some more experience. I'm catching up though.
Yeah, I mean, you just keep on practicing. I mean, your voice is great. Don't change a thing. It just needs to, mature over time. You know what I'm saying?
Golden.
What do you guys have coming up tonight for us?
Richard? Where are you? Richard?
Well, I'm here. I'm enjoying the comedy. You guys are hilarious. So, when I was on last week with Rick, he actually brought my comedic side out. So I like but we're going to talk about systemic and institutional racism, the reality of what it is, because it seems that there are a lot of people out there that are kind of unclear about it. So we want to, get down to it and explain what it is and why it's a reality, not just, something that we're making up in our heads as Black people. This is something that people need to understand.
I'm excited. Well, for all of you watching, this is not In Black and White. This is the 13%. Really looking forward to the show, guys. You guys have a wonderful show.
And with that said, the 13% starts now. I don't know about you, Richard, but I never get tired of that intro.
No, that's a great intro. I like that music. It puts me in the zone. It gives me my woo-saw moment. I need one of those every now and then.
I agree. People who was watching, I've been advocating for Richard to start a chanting practice. So, keep on putting that on him. I'm telling you. Well, welcome to the 13%, everyone. We are your hosts, Cynthia McDonald and Richard Graves. This is my first time actually being back on the show since, being under the knife. So, yay. And I'm telling you right now, I'm hacked up on Pappy pills, so I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth. I'm forewarning you right now.
You'll be all right. Okay. You seem lucid enough, from your comments about Mr. Biden who we were talking about. So I think
Sure.
I think you're on point. I think you're on point.
Okay, well, let's hope so. But before we get into our discussion, everyone, please share this video, share this video, subscribe to the YFNA News channel, and also we do have a Patreon that you can actually be part of to support this channel. Please do so. The Patreon and also buying coffee is also in the show notes. So please pay attention to that and do all that great, wonderful stuff. All right. So that's out of the way.
All right.
Let's get into the topic. So what are we talking about today, Richard?
Well, I've had a few conversations over the last couple of weeks. I'm sure you have too. I've had some on the air, some with people on Facebook or Twitter, and folks I'm seeing a lot of pushback. In one conversation I was having with a Trump supporter, and I was trying to explain systemic and institutional white supremacy or racism in American society. And he tried to keep it in the park of it being government policy. And I was like, I don't think you understand what systemic and institutional racism or white supremacy really is. And of course, he took exception to that, but I realized he didn't, because I thought, a lot of times we think these things are, because we deal with them on a daily basis. We think that that people actually understand these things, but some of it is willful ignorance, in my opinion, because I think some of this should be understood at face value with anyone with a cursory understanding of the history of the United States and African Americans in the United States. But I guess, it isn't as clear sometimes, but some people just either don't want to know it or just really don't understand it. So I'm going to be generous and gracious like Ethan. He's always generous and gracious. I'm going to assume is that they actually don't know, not that they don't want to know, but they actually don't know. So this is an opportunity for us to share with people so they actually understand what it is.
Right on. I would definitely say that even in this particular space, doing advocacy work, doing political work, and even engaging some other people when we're actually talking about institutional and systemic racism, that one of the things that I've noticed, and I think that you can probably corroborate this as well, is that depending on what group of people that you are a part of, institutional and systemic racism is not as apparent. Would you say that would be a fair statement?
I would say so. Yeah, it's not as apparent. If it's not affecting you negatively, it's not as apparent.
Correct. Yeah. And so, I could even think of like, and I think I brought this up on a couple of shows before about a conversation that I had with a person on Twitter where she made the claim that, systemic and institutional racism does not exist. And the reason being is because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Of course, that made everything magically go away.
Right. And I was like, girl, no, no. And so one of the things that I know that I was trying to share with her was different examples and also articles and books that was still written on the subject that is still affecting us today. And she just wasn't, I don't want to make a claim because I'm not in this person's head that she was just shutting me down just because she didn't want to believe it, or was cognitive dissonance kicking in to the point because of this is not her narrative. I don't know. So I am very appreciative that we're actually going to tackle this particular subject matter head on, and hopefully people who are still on the fence of, is systemic and institutional racism a thing? Is it still something that's very much so in practice today? Does it still affect a large portion of the United States population? I'm hoping that we can really answer those questions tonight.
Okay, I agree. Just to start off a little bit, piggybacking on what you're saying, I don't like to try to assign motives to people either. However, let's just go with the reality of what we've seen over the last 6 years. All right, the 2 years before Obama was out and all the way through Trump. At this point in time, there are people, from my observation, who clearly just don't want to believe it. All right. They don't want to. You got categories. You got people that are truly what I call willfully ignorant. And that is not to say that they're stupid people, because I know people get a little touchy about some of my phraseology. But that's not to say that they're stupid
Richard.
people.
No, never.
Not to say that they're stupid, but it's to say that they are willfully choosing to ignore a reality. That's willfully ignorant. You know it's there. You just choose not to be. Regular ignorant, we can give a pass for, because that means you honestly don't know. But willfully ignorant means you are truly trying to not see the writing on the wall. So you got a pretty good portion of the population that is in that category. Then you have people that honestly don't understand, you know, and because race is such an emotional topic, when you talk to people and you say racism, they want to, like, for example, with law enforcement, I've had this conversation with quite a few people, and saying that law enforcement has implicit racial bias against African Americans. I get people flipping out all the time saying, well, you know, all cops aren't racist. I've said, again, this is not saying that every individual police officer is a member of the KKK or burning crosses in people's yards. We got to divorce ourselves of that imagery and understand that it is how the system is set up and how it affects, you know, African Americans. And the fact that the system was set up to be a negative for African Americans from the beginning. So people have to understand that. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, while it was great, it wasn't a magic incantation or spell that he wrote on and all of a sudden everything magically went away. We have a history in this country. And like with the example, law enforcement, those systems and institutions were part of the foundation of it was slave catchers. All right, that was part of the original system of law enforcement in the United States.
Correct.
And unfortunately, law enforcement has been utilized to first enforce slave codes, then the black codes during the after the Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all right, racial discrimination, racial segregation in neighborhoods. The police were used to enforce these things. So that means it's systemic. It's part of that, part of the criminal justice system, the institution being police. So that's why we get systemic and institutional. So this is not to say that every individual police officer hates black people, wakes up in the morning hating black people, but as being part of the criminal justice system, the system itself has these implicit biases against African Americans, and that has to be recognized in order for us to even address it. And that didn't go away because the Civil Rights Act was signed. That's something that we have to deal with, and we've seen examples of these things. So it's things that we have to try to address and fix, basically, you know, fix the fundamental flaws in the system. You know, so
totally agree. I totally agree. So why don't we go ahead and get into what is, let's I know that I think I saw like earlier some people kind of like addressing if systemic racism, institutional racism can be defined. So why don't we go ahead and go into that, Richard, if you want to give us a definition of exactly what is systemic and institutional racism.
Okay. Well, the basic textbook definition is that systemic and institutional racism, or in our country, systemic and institutional white supremacy, is because it's not racism in general that is systematic. It is encoded in our American society, the implicit idea of whites being superior to blacks. That is implicit in the systems and institutions that serve our country. But this is predicated on a social, political, and cultural reality that the systems and institutions that were set to serve American society were predicated on the core idea of the superiority of whites, and initially specifically white males, white landowner males, and later white males in general under Andrew Jackson. And by mutual implication, the idea of black inferiority. So that is what it is. That's how things are set up with those two predicates. And that's how we get systemic and institutional racism and white supremacy. And in our country, like I said, this was from the founding of the country itself, you know, and how slaves were looked at. And even after slaves were freed after the Civil War, it was still cultural and encoded, and the inalienable rights that were supposed to be given to us as citizens were systematically and institutionally denied us all the way up until the end of the civil rights movement. And still after that, you know, there were still people that had to learn the hard way by getting lawsuits. And this is not something, and let me give an example. This is not something that just goes back to the 60s or back to the 1800s. As recently as 2008, all right, banks, big banks that helped create the financial meltdown we had in 2008, banks like Washington Mutual, banks like Wells Fargo, banks like Chase, either settled out of court or ended up losing lawsuits for continuing discriminatory lending practices to blacks. You know, if a black person with a 700 credit score and a white person with a 700 credit score, and everything else the same, debt to income ratio, income, all that stuff the same, they would go to apply for loans. The home loans given to the white applicants was A paper loans, meaning top of the line, less fees, better interest rates. What was given systemically to black borrowers were loans that were B and C paper at higher fees and higher interest rates. That is an example of systemic and institutional racism right there. And this was 2008. And there are still banks as late as 2013 that have been sued for these things, you know, and it still keeps happening. So, you know, it's apparent, or it is something that we need to understand. You know, I use the banking example because a lot of times when we use the criminal justice system, people say overly simplistic things like, well, you know, just don't break the law. But then we have to show examples like when you got a guy like George Floyd who didn't break the law, was accused of giving a fake $20 bill that we found out wasn't fake, wasn't resisting arrest, yet still ended up dead at the hands of police. There's a problem there. So, but, you know, I won't ramble about all that. But at the end of the day, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the systems, and we have divided the systems, you know, so that people understand. Yes, the political system is one of those, and the institutions that comprise the political system right now are the Democratic and Republican parties. I think they were talking on in Black and White, where Ethan and Rick and their guests were saying that the Democrat and Republican parties both have implicit white supremacy operating within them. It operates differently in each party. It manifests differently, but it's there. And then political systems that also includes, you know, the branches of government and how they operate, you know, in regard to things that happen within African American communities. A lot of the government, or I should say government, is used sometimes by the rent-seeking of people with agendas to have policies that negatively affect African American communities. The criminal justice system we talked about, which is comprised of the courts, corrections, and police officers and law enforcement. The finance system we talked about, banks, insurance companies, brokerage firms. The healthcare system of our country, hospitals, clinics, mental health providers, all significantly absent in African American communities. And the education system, both public and private, from preschool through 12th grade to college, and the libraries, you know, as far as their availability. All these things were set up to put blacks in a particular disadvantage. This is how they were set up. So then this is the reality of the situation.
Right. So let's kind of dive into some of those examples. So I know that like we were talking about political systems, criminal justice systems, finance systems, healthcare systems, media systems, and education systems. And so I want to see if we can kind of give like examples to really touch base on each of those particular points that I know that you so brilliantly came up with. So so let's go back to let's touch on the political systems a little bit. Let's about like the U.S. institutions, Democrats, Republican parties. I know that we touched about it a little bit, but can we get deeper into that? Like, can you give really good examples of that?
Okay. Historically, one of the best examples I can give. Obviously, we know that the Republican Party, which is my party, all right, is known or has this reputation of being racist towards African Americans. Most African Americans vote Democrat religiously. You know, if you're a Black Republican, you know, you risk being called a coon or Uncle Tom, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the Republican Party becomes this thing at the end of the Civil Rights Movement because a lot of the Southern Democrats start becoming Republicans, and this is the Southern strategy you and I talked about before.
Right.
Now there's
Atwater.
Right. Now, this is a misconception that this was an instantaneous thing, that everybody just flipped sides right away.
No,
Up until President Carter. President Carter was the last Democratic president to win the South. After that, it stopped. But when Nixon then put into play, looking at the fact that white working class voters were angry, okay, they were angry. They felt they were losing their power because, unfortunately, the end of the civil rights era coincides with industrial jobs leaving our country. So their economic situation starts to change, and they got to find somebody to blame. So Nixon and his cronies put together this strategy to try to flip the Southern Democrats, white working class males in the South, to flip them, all right, to the Republican Party. It pretty much manifests by the time we get to Reagan. It was a long ball game. It wasn't a short ball game. By the time you get to Reagan, you kind of got the flip we're talking about. And that continues to this day. Okay, so that race was utilized by the Republican Party. White supremacy was utilized in a way to try to, how should I say, the disenfranchised white voters, to reach out to them. And basically, it's always it's never blatant. It's always coded. You know what I'm saying? With things like war on drugs or war on crime, it's coded. But in any case, the good old boys, Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond and their lackeys, on to becoming Republicans. Now, where the Democratic Party, in my observation, it manifests its white supremacy is how it deals with the Black community. Take our city of Chicago, for example. All right, the city of Chicago's been under Democratic control since at least Richard Daley Sr. Okay, Blacks have continually voted for Democratic candidates in Chicago, and if you look at it from here to there, from the end of the Civil Rights Movement to now, what the African American community of Chicago has gotten, it's worse schools. All right, it's gotten higher crime. It's gotten less economic opportunity. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party always wants a song and dance for the African American community about what we're going to do for you, vote for us. They come to our churches, and you have people like Hillary trying to sound like Dr. King, and trying to get Blacks to vote. And they like talking about
my bag.
Yeah. So they like talking about racism or the politic of anti-racism. But at the same time, this hasn't really come up with measurable public policy that affects the African American community in a positive way. It's sort of like being a cheap date. They know if a guy knows that you're going to cooperate, regardless of where he takes you, he's going to take you. I'll take you to McDonald's then. All right, you're not demanding a steak and lobster meal. And I believe, unfortunately, the racism within the Democratic Party is to take African American voters for granted for their votes and really never deliver with the actual policy that we require in order to actually move forward past this particular point we're at in history right now. So those are the two examples I give.
I totally agree with that, especially when it comes to like measurable policies that will actually affect a community for the better. Like oftentimes we definitely get from the Democratic Party, I call it the tickling of the ear, right? I think of like, okay, let's go ahead and get us like a really good Black celebrity, right? Like let's get Diddy, talking about vote or die, right? And then we're going to go ahead and just do this whole song and dance to pander for your vote, but we're not really going to give you anything that's really going to help be effective in your community for the better. And so like, I think of, and I'm pretty sure you're privy to like some of the violence that happened in Chicago this past weekend. I believe a mother got a mother and her child, right?
Yeah.
I believe that they both were shot. The mother survived, the child died.
About 3-year-old child.
Yeah, a 3-year-old child. And I remember like I was called by a friend of mine in Los Angeles and she was like, "What, sis, is going on in Chicago?" Right. And one of the things I told her, I said, well, and this is not, and I know that I had like back and forth, like, with a few people concerning like Black on Black crime. But one of the things that I said, and I think that both you and I can both agree on this, is that you're always going to see higher crime rates in more disenfranchised and poor communities, and
Absolutely.
no matter what color they are.
No
and
matter.
and unfortunately, that particular community where that happened in is like that. Like, I don't know when the last time you rode through Inglewood, and I know that they got a whole
Not recently.
yeah, man. See, okay, so I know that they mark that area for like an opportunity zone-ish, but you know, the thing about it is that it's still very much so a very poor community, very high unemployment rate, very poor. You know, we got the corners that the superintendent talked about last week, which is a very much so a systemic problem, and you got people that is trying to protect their corners, so they're protecting their assets or their money, and so oftentimes when it comes to protecting their assets and their money, that means that you got to go. Like, any person is infringing on my particular territory, it's going to, so I can protect my assets and money, you got to go. And whomever gets in the crossfire, so be it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Unfortunately.
And it is unfortunate. And you know, and one of the things that has been wanting is specific policies that actually target that issue. You know, what are we going to do about the poverty in that area? What are we going to do about the socioeconomics in that area? What are we going to do about unemployment in that area? I mean, because, you know, I'm telling you something, if you're making a decent wage and you're able to feed yourself and your family, buy a home, live the American dream, right? Live the American life. The last thing you're doing is going to be worried about who's going to be standing on your corner.
Absolutely.
Keep it a buck. You know what I'm saying? So, and unfortunately, these are the different type of policies that has been missing in our communities, in Black American communities, mostly people who descend from chattel slavery, African American communities. These are the things that are absolutely missing that we have a big issue with. And yeah, I know, Damien, I feel you. I've been through Inglewood a few times very recently, and I'm like, ooh, clutches imaginary pearls. But that's what we got. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we do.
I want to touch on that real quick, because I had a conversation earlier on a friend of mine's radio program. And I mentioned black on black crime, and of course, everybody lost it. All right. Everybody lost it. Everybody was like, well, that's a deflection, and Black Lives Matter is about. I'm like, okay, hold on. I said, what I said was not talking about the specific organization, Black Lives Matter, but the overall movement. And what I mean by movement is the overall Black people are just like, look, we tired of seeing Black people senselessly killed by police. All right. Or by vigilantes who think they're the police.
Correct.
So that being said, you know, I said it is sometimes hard for people outside of our community to understand that, you know, we're yelling about one thing, but we got this 3-year-old kid that got killed and his mom got shot, and there were 2 other children got killed, and countless teenagers got killed, and you don't see Black Lives Matter at these events. Now, and let me be clear, I know people who are at some of because there are events about this, don't get the coverage. All right. Father Flager's organization is out there. Nation Islam is out there sometimes. You know, you have other Black organizations throughout Chicago and non-Black people that are actually trying to bring light to this, but it's not the sexy thing the media wants to follow. It's not the narrative they want to point. But I'm going to say this. Somebody from Black Lives Matter got upset. And this is an example of what I call the Democrats or the left doing Black folk dirty. Okay. You have a movement like Black Lives Matter. We know what it's for. We know what happened. We know we want to see actionable change in policy in police departments across the country. That's what we really want. But then you have an organization that all of a sudden you look at the page and it's about Black Lives Matter, supposedly. Then it moves on to the LGBTQ community. And let me be clear, I think LGBTQ people deserve all the same and equal rights that I deserve, and I will fight for you too. However, then it goes on to say about the environment. Don't get me wrong, I think global warming is a problem for the whole world.
Sure.
And a whole list of neoliberal progressive points they're trying to piggyback on what we're talking about.
No, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, so it'd be akin to us saying, you know, when LGBTQ people have been killed by people because of who they are, which is wrong, you know. It'd be akin to us going, okay, yeah, we're all about, you know, justice for, you know, these LGBTQ people that have been killed, these trans people can be killed. We're for that. But by the way, we need to talk about Black policies too. That's what it's like. And it's not that they're both not important. It's just that let's focus on what we're focusing on about what happened here.
Yes.
But they've hijacked. So in that, if you can be about all these different things, when I asked you why you can't be present and bring that media presence with you when we're dealing with a 3-year-old that got killed, a 12-year-old that got killed, a mom that got shot, I think that's disingenuous. That's disingenuous for you to do that. And that is what the left, the Democrats do. They it's like they use us to push their agenda, but it's really not ours. You know, and not that we don't care about all those other things, because the reality, that big problem in the hood right now, and it's so complex. And let me take a couple seconds just to say about Chicago. Sure. One of the reasons why Chicago has this problem, and it's much more serious than in LA or New York right now. Chicago's got a whole lot of organized crimes issues going on. We talked about the gang issues in Chicago. And let's be clear. When we say Black on Black crime, this is specific urban communities that have this economic depression. This is not a racial thing. If you go out to Homewood, Flossmoor, those are predominantly Black towns. They don't have shootings every weekend. They don't have shootings that often at all. Because everybody.
And I would even interject and say this: like, I live in a predominantly Black community, and it has been predominantly Black since the late 60s. And one of the things that I never, ever seen is anyone getting shot on my block. And I live on the south side of Chicago. Ever. And I want to preface that. I'm not a rich person at all. You know, I'm not, I don't got like tens of trillions of dollars in the bank. If that was the case, I probably wouldn't be on the stream right now. But the thing about it is, but one of the things that I would definitely say, like, I remember when I was finishing my my certification for community health at Malcolm X in 2018, one of the projects that I was tasked with is actually looking at the demographics of my community as far as like health is concerned, and some of the health disparities that goes on, you know, for that community. And a lot of the health issues that, you know, I would say that is in this community is very prevalent in Black Americans, period. Hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cancers, you know, the lot, right? You know what I'm saying? Right, and a lot of them are preventable. But one of the things that you also have to look at was crime rate and also income and educational level. And one of the things that I noticed that what they said about my particular community, they call it white collar. And I'm like, wait, how? Because I didn't see how, I didn't know, you know what I'm saying? But the thing about it is that I will definitely have to say is that most of the Black Americans that's in my community are homeowners. They've worked their jobs forever. A lot of them are baby boomers and silent generation, and they kind of like pass their houses on, you know, to their children. And some of them have like pensions. Some of them a lot of them work for the government. You know, a lot of them work in healthcare. Matter of fact, like one of the communities that's right by me is called Pill Hill. That was where a lot of the doctors that worked at the hospital that was in my area, they worked at, you know, and they built their houses over there. So one of the things that I never have to concern myself with when I'm in my community. I mean, before I had my surgery, I would run all the time.
Right.
So I would be running through the parks, you know what I'm saying? Like by myself. I never was concerned about, you know, do I need to make sure my pepper spray was on me? Even though I did. Absolutely. You know, I never had to worry about having a piece on me. I never had to be concerned with that. So, you know, that's how I know that when I think about Black on Black crime, and when I think about like some of these high crime rates, it's less of, I don't want to say a racial issue, because there is systemic racism that actually works with that particular vernacular because of the socioeconomic positionality. Right. So I put it that way.
It's just that it's not a genetic issue just because of our skin color.
Right.
That's the point I wanted to make. Because a lot of people want to use that as basically trying to reinforce why police should be afraid of Black males, because we're all dangerous and we're all ready to shoot somebody. We all gangsters or whatever. So that's not the issue. And like you said, you know, Chicago 20 years ago, I remember going to the South Side. I grew up in the suburbs. I remember going to the South Side, to Chatham, to Pill Hill, and all these different very nice neighborhoods. I felt perfectly safe, like I didn't feel crime lurking around me, and they were very good homeowners. But as you know, those areas you guys are living in are getting smaller because people are leaving, moving out to the west and south suburbs, and with that creates these situations. But the one thing I was going to say is that yes, this is systemic. It comes from the lack of jobs, because if you give people the ability to make money, lack of jobs, lack of access to jobs. If you put all the factory jobs and the Amazons out in the suburbs, and you have a public transportation system that doesn't even accommodate getting people from there to here, you create a problem. And it's not that, let me be clear, most of the people in these communities are not part of the underground economy.
No,
Most of the black men are not in gangs and not selling drugs. It's a small minority, but unfortunately, that minority is basically holding the hood hostage right now. And one of the key factors that I want to point out that is making that happen is the fact that in Chicago, there used to be two factions of gangs called the People and Folk Nations. Okay. The People Nation was started by Jeff Fort, the leader of the El Rookins Stones. And the Folk Nation was started by Larry Hoover and David Barksdale. David Barksdale died, and Larry Hoover, who was leader of the Gangster Disciples, and they used to be the Black Gangster Disciples, and all the Folk Nation gangs that were up under that banner. The same thing with the People Nation was the Stones and the Vice Lords and Latin Kings, and all that fell up under that. And it was pretty organized for organized crime.
Sure.
But eventually, Larry Hoover and Jeff Ford went to federal prison, and a lot of the other leaders went to prison, which they rightfully should have because of the things they were doing. I'm not sitting here trying to be an apologist.
Sure.
But unintended consequences or intended consequences, depending on who you ask.
Sure.
But unintended consequences were that these gang nations ended up breaking up into factions. First thing was the Black Gangster Disciples broke up into the Black Disciples and the Gangster Disciples. And that was a serious war. The projects were still up at this time. So Cabrini Green was like a war zone, you know. Now, bringing up the projects get took down, and now you diffuse all this broken up gangness into the regular communities. And now you put all these BDs and GDs in neighborhoods with Vice Lords and Four Corner Hustlers and Stones. Now you got another problem. And then as the drug trafficking started coming through Chicago, drugs comes from Mexico to Chicago, then they get dispersed. That's how there's a straight highway. So there's so much money being made. I always joke, I think I joked with you, I was glad that I found out later in life that people were making $20,000 a day at the corner. Because I was like, well, I'm glad I didn't know when I was young. I used to be judgmental. You know, why don't they just go work at McDonald's? $15,000 a day? Ooh, I'm glad I didn't know, you know, because, you know, there's a lot of money being funneled through the community, a lot of illegal money, and people are trying to get it. And now you have these gangs broken up. And not only did the People and Folk Nations break up, but within those breakups started being weird type of alliances with people on block to block to block, which is similar to Los Angeles. You know, if you go to Long Beach or if you go to South Central, where you got different factions of Crips and Bloods. But in Chicago, it got even more complex because you got Black Disciples working with Vice Lords, who they were normally enemies with. You got GDs working with Four Corner Hustlers, and people are clicking up by block, and the money being made. And the fact that these young people, a lot of them are on the actual drugs. You know, songs about, you know, Molly's and Percocets and drinking these purple drinks or whatever it is they do. All of this creates scenarios where you got a hell of a problem. And the Democratic Party, which runs Chicago, which runs the state of Illinois, I think to me, they'd rather pay attention to the police violence because that's something that is easily fixable compared to actually saying, what policy do we need to come up with? What do we need to deal with in education, in economics, and public health? You know, mental health is a necessity, like you talked about. Mental health is a necessity. What do we need to do to make this right? And I think that I don't think anybody wants to address that because it's too daunting of a task. That's my opinion, at least.
You know, and that to me goes back into the systemic racism portion of it, especially when we're talking about politics, because no one really wants to take on the daunting task of how do we fix this, right? because we know that there was like specific actions, policies, effects of the causes that actually got us to this particular place, right? And like when you're talking about disenfranchisement of, you know, Black people, especially when it comes to their economics, right? We're not, and one of the things that I know that we were also going to discuss a little bit was about, you know, banking industries not lending to Black people. You know what I'm saying? I had an article that I pulled up about, and I think that this happened, I want to say, and this particular article was written in 2018, called "Modern Day Redlining and How Banks Block Black People of Color from Home Ownership." And this particular article was talking about a young lady who was trying to purchase a home, and she went through several different banks. Matter of fact, let me see if I can pull up a little bit about the information down here. So, okay, so I'm going to read a little bit. Okay, so this modern day redlining persisted in 61 metro areas, even when controlling for applicants' income, loan amount, and neighborhood, according to millions of Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records and analyzed by Reveal from the Center of Investigative Reporting. This year-long analysis, based on 31 million records, relied on techniques used by lending academics, the Federal Reserve, and the Department of Justice to identify lending disparities. It found a pattern of troubling denials for people of color across the country, including the major metropolitan areas such as Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, Rockford, Illinois, St. Louis, and San Antonio. African Americans face the most resistance in southern cities, Mobile, Alabama, Greenville, North Carolina, and Gainesville, Florida, and Latinos in Iowa City and Iowa. No matter what their location, loan applicants told similar stories describing an uphill battle with loan officers who they said seemed to be fishing for a reason to say no. Here's one quote. "I had a fair amount of savings and still had so much trouble just left and right," said Rochelle Farrell, a 33-year-old Black woman who was rejected twice by lenders when she tried to buy a brick row house close to Malcolm X Park in Philadelphia, where African Americans were 2.7 times as likely as whites to be denied for a conventional mortgage. And it goes back into the history of like redlining and you know,
absolutely,
how that actually works. But you know, but we can even think about that as far as not even just even home ownership, but people who are actually trying to like, you know, get loans even for like business, right?
Absolutely.
I had a friend of mine, actually president of our chapter here at ADO Chicago. Shout out to ADOS. He was trying to purchase an income property. He is a veteran. He's going to use his GI Bill in order for him to be able to get the building, right? So he was told, and I want to say at least by one, I want to say about a couple, but I want to say at least by one lending institution that, yeah, we can, you know, we'll go ahead and finance for a single family home, but not for income property, because you need at least about $12,000 in the bank in order for you to be able to get this particular property, and you can't get it from somebody else. So nobody can gift it to you, you just got to have it. Wow. You just got to have it, you know? And he was like, wait, what? You know what I'm saying? And I mean, and like we understand the rationale as far as like having a significant savings for income property, because of course, like you need to be able to fix it up, you need to be able to
right.
You know, pay for different things, and that makes sense. But at the same time, you know, isn't that something that like the mortgage itself to do? Like, say for instance, like if you purchase a property that's, let's just say that's a fixer upper that's like worth $70,000, right? And, you know, you may want to go in and say, okay, well, I know this property costs $70,000, but I still need to put another $10,000, $15,000 into it to get it to be a, you know, a viable living space for me to be able to live and to rent. So oftentimes we know that that's definitely a thing that you can go to your bank and be able to get loans that's more for the property, because you have to also think of the contingency of building it, right? Or not building it, but fixing it up. Right. But you would see more often, like this article has talked about, how like, you know, it just seems like that there is an issue where there is going to be more and more problems for, you know, especially like if you're African American, if you're Black American, for being able to actually get these particular mortgages in order for you to be able to do that. And just think about what would that have entailed for, you know, this young man to be able to get income property, you know, be able to make a living for himself, be able to, you know, have a living space for himself, and also be able to, you know, provide living spaces for other people and make money as well. You know, something that white folk do all the time. I mean,
well, that's how you build a community. I mean, the fact is, you should be able to get a loan on let's say it's investment property. You pay $20,000 for it, but you know that if the property were brought up to code and everything, it'd be worth $70,000. You should be able to, and what a lot of people used to do, and I don't know if it's racial or because the banks are skittish because of the 2008 crisis, but you could say, okay, I bought this property for $20,000. I need to borrow another $30,000 in order to fix this property up, and then it will appraise out to $70,000. And then you have a property with equity in it. You've built this abandoned building up, and it's looking good in the community now. All those things would benefit the African American communities in those urban areas. It would help on, like you said, it creates income for the person doing it, creates affordable housing for the people that need to live there, the working class people need to live there. And then it also creates safer environment for the community. There's less places for somebody to snatch some lady up and hurt them, or to be running your drug operation, and enough with the abandoned buildings and stuff. And that's the type, if the banks aren't loaning that way, that's the type of policy we should be seeking from the government, meaning that with the people that we elect, that we put in office, Democrat or Republican, we want you to come up with a lending program through the FHA for borrowers in these communities to be able to do these type of projects, to increase the equity value of the home, to be able to create a safe environment, to also be able to have somewhere for affordable housing. You solve 3 problems with 1 stone there, but we don't hear any of this. This is not what, now you read Joe Biden's thing. I don't know. I didn't see any of that. You know, maybe I missed it. All right. But
Joe Biden's African American agenda, which was not an agenda for African Americans whatsoever.
Right. So, but these are the type of things. And I understand that sometimes people in the communities don't know to ask for these things. They don't know what to ask for. They know they got a problem going on. And, you know, it's just, but again, this is why if you're voting for Democrats, they want to come to your churches and talk about the hot sauce they have in their pocket. You need to press them about what are you going to do. And then you need to trust the people, because our communities, we have a lot of people in the African American community that have degrees in the social sciences. And I'm not saying you need to have a degree to do good. That's not what I'm saying. But you have people who are social workers, who are planners, who are able to plan a community out. You have people who are doctors. You have people who are sociologists. You have people who are political scientists that are from these communities that want to help the community. It's just people we have to start organizing in a way and making those demands of whoever it is, Republican or Democrat. You know, we need to make those demands, because again, even if Black Lives Matter came to the community about this shooting and said, let's shine a light on this. Even if that's all they did, that creates pressure on who did the shooting, because now everybody's talking about it, and everybody wants this person to come out, and they want to know who he is or she is, you know. But the fact that it wasn't even brought up, you know, well, no rally there for that. And again, not only does that, it does a disservice to Black people, but it makes us look stupid to the rest of the world. Because, okay, you're mad about this guy who had his knee on this guy's neck, which we should be mad about. It's not either or. We can be mad about both. But at the same time, this 3-year-old child got killed. 2 other small children got killed. And all I hear is excuses. And that's another thing the Democratic Party and the left likes to create. And don't get me wrong. I know that people in my party on the right, they have a habit of pushing the personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is, you know, just your choices, which is disingenuous. All right. But at the same time, I think one of the things the Democratic Party has done to Black people since the end of the Civil Rights Movement, if you look at Malcolm X talking back in the 60s, or Elijah Muhammad, or you look at Marcus Garvey, there was a lot of, you know, responsibility to Black men that was being preached, that you need to be this type of man, that if you're a drug dealer, you're not a victim of nothing. you are choosing to do that. Don't get me wrong. A lot of those guys in the Nation of Islam were drug dealers. That's why they knew. All right.
Right.
They owned their BS. They
Yeah.
owned it. They said, hey,
Right.
I was a drug dealer. I was poisoning my community. I changed. They called people on it. Now we have this permissive cultural thing that, I'm sorry to say, but it does come from the left, that nobody's responsible for what they're choosing to do. You know, that these young black men, don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of forces that get them to make choices. And I'm not saying to throw them in prison for the rest of their lives. But at the same time, we can't excuse that. When you come to prison, we're going to get you trained in culinary or barbershops or whatever, so you can do a real job when you get out. But we have to hold our brothers and sisters accountable. And like I said, remember what I said? Real quick, remember what I said about Jeff Ford and Larry Hoover? All the bad things about them you can say, but what you can't say is whoever killed one of them 3-year-old kids, them Stones or them GDs, that person was going to get dealt with. He might not even make it to the police station. Yeah. And that was not something that they were going to allow. There was going to be some conversations about that. You know, so holding people accountable. I'm not saying it's a negative, gang members holding other gang members accountable. But at the end of the day, we have nobody in our community holding these people, holding our young black men or even older black men, because there's some still gangbanging, doing dumb stuff too, holding them accountable. We're making too many excuses for this stuff. And again, I'm not dismissing all the socioeconomic stuff that goes on, but at some point, men have to be men.
To give you like some cover with that excuse thing, right? The way that I look at it is that I think that oftentimes when we look at this whole, issue, is that to give people an out is a way to not fix the problem or deal with it, to be honest with you. Like, when I think about, because like, when I look at like some of the policies that, have been pushed as far as, okay, so what are we going to do about this problem that's pervasive in the Black community when it comes to, high crime rate? And how many studies have been done about this? Okay, like how many articles, how many, different social anthropologists that have come out with, like correlating high crime with poverty and things of this nature. But we never want to deal with the cancer. And that's always been like, anytime that I had like any debate with any person concerning like crime in our communities, it's never me giving an excuse to these people for what they do, because I would never do that. You know what I'm saying? I'm Black. I ain't out here shooting folk, for willy-nilly for shits and giggles. I'm not doing that. Excuse me for my saying shit, but hey, whatever. Anywho, but at the same time, there has to be like some type of, okay, the community take responsibility, but what are we doing at the government policy level in order for them to take responsibility to actually fix this issue? What are we doing about bringing jobs? And not just, and it's not, and one of the things that, and I can even say this concerning like, systemic racism, when we think about like, some of the businesses that we like laud in our communities to stay open. Like I think about the Walmart that I believe that Lori Lightfoot basically, just went on bended knee and said, please, sir, don't leave us. Please don't leave us, on 83rd and Stewart. And I think that they finally said that, yes, they'll stay. But, don't say, but think about the workers that are there and how much they make an hour. Think about that. I think it's like around what, $12-13 an hour or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think it just got up to that.
Yeah, just got up to that. Okay, and I believe that I think that Chicago just made their minimum wage about $13 an hour. I think they just made that. So if you even think about what is required to even live in the city, yet what the minimum wage is, I mean, come on. You cannot live in Chicago halfway decent on $13 an hour. You just can't. No. You just like,
very difficult.
Extremely difficult. Like, and that's why you got like chain of people that's living with their parents and things like that, and it's not necessarily because they want to, it's because they can't afford, to live outside of their home. They gotta, that's why have like a lot of African American homes, a lot of Black American homes that are multi-generational. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with income. It has to do with and lack of wealth. You know what I'm saying? So when I even think about a lot of this, and this looks like that, you know, I don't even think that we scratched the surface on like some of these different, you know, institutions, because I want to get to education and I want to get to business too.
And let me be clear. All these things tie in.
Yeah.
You know, without question. You know, we could do a show about each one of those categories, do a whole show. Maybe we should, you know, as far as education, economics. Basically talked about economics and crime, because they actually are very hand in hand, you know, and it's not complicated. Anywhere you go in the world, you go to Cairo, Egypt, in the poor communities, guess what they got? Crime. All right.
Yep.
And the reason being is disproportionate because people are trying to make it. Again, I'm not trying to excuse people making those choices, but I am saying I understand how you could make that choice.
Correct.
See, the difference between myself and a lot of people within on the right, a lot of people on the right, it's all you, but no, it's not.
Right.
It's easier for me to make the right choice in the comfort. I'm from Aurora. And I used to think I lived a very similar experience to people in Chicago. It was similar in many ways, culturally, music, food. You know, I was poor too, but being poor in Aurora wasn't the same as being poor in Chicago. You know, meaning that there were things that my brothers were dealing with that I didn't have to deal with. A level of danger, a level of crime, a level of drug dealing, because of the fact the structure of the gangs was there and organized crime to move this product. So it you know, I used to think, well, you know, they could have just took a job, until I realized the reality of the situation. If you're 13 years old and, you know, mom's struggling, all right, and maybe dad's there, because, you know, people always want to blame Black women for not having husbands. Let's say mom and dad are both there. Mom and dad, but they're working hard. They're working these little minimum wage jobs, and they're out the house a lot. You're at home. Local drug dealers say, hey, man, watch his corner. Watch his corner. Give you $100 a day, watch his corner.
Right.
Kid watches corner, $100 a day. And they give him an extra $700 on Sunday. Now he done made $1,400. All right. Now people can judge and sit there and say, well, I would tell my kid to stop. That's what you say. All right. But now everybody's living a lot better. It's a lot less, it's not as hard. All right. And all he's doing is looking at a corner.
Right.
Unfortunately, people don't play long ball. He's getting his moral compass from who's giving him that money.
That's
and that creates the problem. I mean, you saw Goodfellas, right? All right. Well, it's the same. Organized crime is organized crime. What was the kid doing? The kid in Goodfellas, that Ray Liotta's kid, his character, when he was a kid, he watched the gangsters across the street. They had the money. They gave him a little job, giving drinks to everybody, made him feel like a man. And then he ends up in that path. A lot of people do that. And I'm not saying most people don't do that, but enough does that. I think we can chip away at some of that. You know, we can bring the numbers down and people can actually have a job as opposed to doing that. But I think it's wrong when people get in the high horse and say they should make better choices. Yeah, they should make better choices. However, let's be clear that society kind of puts people in a situation where some choices are harder than others. And as a society, as citizens of the United States, as a Black man, I want to come up with policy that makes that choice not so hard. You know, and like you said, housing is important. I can't change what Walmart's going to pay you unless I unionize them. You know, that's a serious uphill fight. But what can I do to get that guy that loan to build some affordable housing that he can rent to these people who are working, to take a little light off so they can look at the future? Well, maybe I'm not working as many hours. I got somewhere solid. I can do this with 40 hours a week. Maybe I'll go to school and get a certification for plumbing, or maybe I'll go to increase their level so they can do it by education. But we have to have policy that puts that gives people a break. Basically, that's give them a break. You got to give them a break. Everybody, and people say, you know, this whole idea of I did it by myself. Nobody does it by themselves.
That is
like take Donald Trump. What Donald Trump said? Donald Trump said, well, you know, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I just had a small $1 million loan from my dad. I'm like, did he just say small and $1 million in the same sentence?
You should have did it in one sentence. That's a
so that lets you know people don't do it by themselves. It's generational wealth. You know,
Exactly.
somebody at some point's got to give you a break, you know. And all I'm saying is, we're not trying to make everybody in the community millionaires, but we can make working class people, and we should want more working class functional people because that's a broader tax base for everybody, and it lowers things, it lowers crime. It's a positive. It's a win-win. Nobody loses.
As you just said, that there has been no group that has access to wealth and did it by themselves. That is a lie. Okay.
No.
I believe the Homestead Act began in 1862 and ended in the 1980s. Millions of acres of land that have been given out to folk, mostly white people, that they were able, not only were they able to get the land, they were able to get land grants so that they can mechanize the land. They were also given education so that they knew how to farm the land and also knew how to build on the land in order for them to be able to create generational wealth. And oftentimes that was something that was definitely a policy that was locked out of Black Americans, you know, especially that descend from chattel slavery, because, well, you know, there wasn't nobody there but slaves at that particular time.
Well,
but,
you do got that group of Black folk I told you about that were never slaves, right? You ever come across some Black folk? Most of them from out East Coast. They quick to tell you my ancestors weren't ever slaves. Like, okay, that group. I'm like, so let me say this real quick. You and I have talked about reparations,
right?
And you know, I'm not one of the people that is part of that movement at the moment. However, I think you just said something that actually is making me reconsider my position. Now, I may not be for it in the ways that I've seen people put it forward, but that whole Homestead Act thing, that's very central in American history to generating wealth for a large portion of white America.
That's right.
And even though our ancestors were promised 40 acres and a mule, they never got. And even though they built without that, my thing is, I guess branding it reparations to me, I think kind of, and we're going to have a discussion about reparations because all right, but branding it reparations.
And I will, when we do have that discussion, I just want to say that I will bring a couple of experts that's on there that actually made reparations their life work. But that's a future show. But continue.
Right, and I'll ask Dr. Reed to see if he wants to come on because he has a pretty. It's not the idea of the making people whole. It's not that idea. It's the politic and the terminology and the phraseology, which is what I would say as a political scientist is something, and as a historian would say that's something that's never going to happen if it present. It's sort of like on the show they talked about Obamacare, right? They offered Obamacare to people. The white folks didn't want it. They want nothing to do with Obamacare. We don't want no darn Obamacare, you know. But when presented with the same exact policy, and it told, well, would you like the Affordable Care Act? It's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And that's how powerful branding is. You have people fought tooth and nail who would have truly benefited. We had a damn pandemic, all right, a pandemic, and they're cutting people off of insurance and stuff. Would have benefited from Obamacare, all right, that were fighting against it. But when it was offered under the Affordable Care Act, oh yeah, that's good. I think that my thing with reparations as a politic, as a terminology, as a phraseology to utilize to try to forward the idea of economic relief to African American communities is that because of how ingrained and I'm going to say this, I hope I don't hurt any feelings, the hatred of Black people is in this country. The hatred and envy and anger that is always directed to us. We said we got BET. Now, these people had MTV for 5-10 years and played one damn Black video. And we said BET to play Black videos, and now we're racist because we want BET. We have had the most negative experience of any group in this country with law enforcement, historically. All right. And the moment we say, you know what, we tired of your knee on our neck, we matter too. Black lives matter. Oh my God, we're racist now. Anytime we point out a racial structure, we then become the racist in the eyes of a lot of people. And that is the pushback, because if you got a bunch of white senators, Democratic or Republican, they got to push a bill through. All right. you got to be able to at least brand it in a way that they can actually do it. But we're going to talk about that. Like I said, I know I'm going to give you credit, Cynthia. You are the first person to ever phrase an argument to make me reconsider my position on something like that. You know,
that's because I am me into him. But yes, we're definitely
we'll discuss.
We're definitely going to have that conversation. I can appreciate what you just said as far as like phraseology. I would even say myself, I'm about to put myself on blast because reparations was definitely not a policy that I was an advocate for. Let's just say about a few years ago. I was definitely you can go and get a job. You can go here to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can do that. What's wrong with you? You know what I'm saying? I was definitely one of those people who was who would say that a lot until I got some better information. And I think that that's what happens with a lot of different things. Like with any I think I would say like with any type of subject matter, you will definitely change positions. Well, I know that I will with better information. And I definitely, when I was really privy to the position of Black Americans, especially those who descend from chattel slavery and where they are now, only having 2.6% of the wealth in the state nation, where white people actually hold 90% of the nation's wealth. The middle Black family only worth to $1,700 liquid, versus white folks, that's in like the 6 digits. The average, the median Black family actually only bringing in about $34,000 throughout the United States, versus, white Americans, I believe in Chicago is like over $70,000. Asian Americans is like around 50,000. Latinx Americans is low, it's like around 45, 46, So, when I was really privy to a lot of these particular statistics, and shout out to ADOS, shout out to Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore and Dr. Darity, who actually did a lot of this work, and also being privy to the Color of Wealth reports that it really broke down how a lot of Black Americans that fare throughout the United States, like especially when it comes to their worth. I believe Baltimore, I believe that the net worth of the medium Black person that descends from chattel slavery in Baltimore is like $8. It's something abhorrent, in Los Angeles, like $200 liquid, So, and then also looking at my own bank account, I'd be like, child, how? You know what I'm saying? Like I got a whole job, you know what I'm saying? But, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say real quick, it's, I guess what I'm saying is the argument, and we're going to work this out because I've talked to a lot of ADOS people, and I have never come to any agreement with them whatsoever. And it's because of what I feel the ridiculousness of what they're actually what's the word for it? Presupposing. Now, what I have learned to talk to you,
presuppositions, child. We ain't even gonna go there, but go ahead and say what you're gonna say.
What I've learned from you is just like with BLM, there's a range of thought here. There's a range of thought, and I think that in regards to me coming from a policy aspect, what I seek is that there does need to be economic relief for African American communities. Sure. All right. And I think that the pushback most people think is if somebody's going to hand us $1 million check and white folks is mad that we got $1 million. That's not what I think that would look like.
No, it won't.
There are ways. And I think it's just a matter of phraseology and actual, because like with Black Lives Matter, I'm not a member of Black Lives Matter, but I don't have a problem with them because I believe Black Lives Matter. The phrase I agree with. All right. But what I've come to find about Black Lives Matter, again, there's a range. You got a whole lot of stuff going on there. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. At some point, you got to focus on what you're actually trying to.
And that's my issue with Black Lives Matter. The organization is that it's so scattered. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are we focusing on here, people? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, yes, I believe Black Lives Matter too. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have had my instances when I got stopped by police and was hyperventilating and everything was paid for. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't know, because like I remember what happened to Sandra Bland. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
One bad day could be my life. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely appreciate the movement itself and, you know, people being activated in this particular space. But, you know, again, I'm really about attacking the cancers that got us here in the first place, you know, and the only thing that attacks the cancer is policies. You know, Dr. King said it best. We can't, what he said, you can't legislate morals, but you can regulate behavior, you know, and that's kind of where I'm at. And that's why I'm really into, you know, what are we going to do about closing this racial wealth gap? What are we going to do about, you know, uplifting the socioeconomic positionality of Black Americans, you know, who are in disenfranchised communities, you know, and I know that we're, you know, oftentimes we hear a lot of different buzzwords like opportunity zones and all these other stuff that's being thrown out at the, but these are not policies that are actually going to be effective, you know, for Black Americans, you know. And I feel you too, still learning. They said, I don't know, Ethan, if you want to go ahead and highlight their last comment, when they said, once I got the data, I was blown away and pissed off. Native Black Americans don't deserve to be at the bottom caste in our country our ancestors built. And I totally agree, you know.
I agree with that.
Yeah, totally agree. And so, but I also know that, you know, us as a community won't necessarily get anything unless we advocate for it. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
yeah. I mean, like we have to, I mean, even if you piecemeal out different agenda points concerning reparations, you still have to advocate for it, you know? So, you know, but yeah, we're definitely going to have that conversation.
Yeah, because I think we're in agreement. And then this is one thing I want to say, you know, and I'm going to say this to all the Black folk watching or whoever will watch this. We got to stop with this whole idea that if you're a Democrat or a Republican, or if you're a Christian or atheist or Muslim, or if you are gay or straight or whatever, or if you are a Cubs fan or Sox fan,
whatever you are, right?
Yeah, we as Black people, we have to get past all that and understand that we can have differences of opinion and we can have differences of position, but as long as we're all on the page of we want what's best for our people, period. So we can get in the room and all our differences, argue, hash it out, and come up with a plan.
Right.
And that's what we have to do. We got to stop. I've seen so many times people shut down Blacks who are Republicans because they're Republicans. Right. Don't get me wrong. We got Candace Owens and Ben Carson that have given us a very bad name.
They are not.
I say look at look at Colin Powell when we say Black Republicans. Think about Colin Powell, please.
Sure.
At least Colin Powell. Don't think about
you know, Colin and I might be related. I don't know. You know, we may be related. You know, because half my family is from Jamaica, and according to my my aunt in Canada, that my grandfather's side is related to the Powells, and that may be Colin. So he may be a long distant cousin of mine. Who knows?
Reach out and see if he'll come on the show.
Right.
You know, but
we let us talk to Colin.
Yeah, but please think of the Secretary Powell. Think of the General. Don't think of Candace Owens. No. And let me just throw this out here real quick.
Sure.
One of the things that's happened because of Trump is, I believe, there has been a disintegration of the Republican Party. What you have right now is what I call the radical right wing they're running the show in the Republican Party. Most of the moderate Republicans pretty much are sitting there like, what's going on? We're voting for Biden. We don't care. We voted for Hillary. We don't care. I think that long term, we won't see the parties change until we actually start doing something about the party system and the primary system. But at the end of the day,
and what we advocate for too.
Right, what we advocate for. But if we're Christians, like I see Christians and Black Christians and Black Muslims argue all the time. And it's like, look, man, we both want what's best for the community. All right. We don't have to agree on religion. All right. I respect you. We're in a country where you don't have to be my religion. I don't have to be yours.
Right.
But we have to be Black together because we don't really got a choice about that. You know, we can pretend we're not until something happens, you know, like when Michael Jackson pretended he wasn't Black. And then something happened and he had Fruit of Islam security. You know what I'm saying? I remember when Vanessa Williams won the Miss America. You know, we were all happy for her. Then she started saying her ethnicity. She listed all things from all over the planet, and then got at the very bottom, and part black. But when she fell from grace, it was the black community that embraced her music and embraced her as an actress.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, we as a people, we got to stop getting at each other, all right, and start listening to each other. Just because a person say they are Republican, or they say they're Muslim, or they say this and that, don't shut people down. Listen to what they have to say. You know, we have to do that. I mean, I'm guilty of that. If you are a hotep, I'm pretty much not listening to much you got to say. However, the Lord is working on me with that one, because even the hoteps, all right, even the hoteps, we need them too, all right. As long as you know we are, but I think that.
Let me put it this way: a hotep is correct like a broken clock at least twice a day.
You know, all right, Cynthia, you can't talk about the people. They're gonna be emailing us. You know, we're gonna have. They already
come for me on Twitter. They come for me on Twitter all the time. So hey, they come for me. So it's all
but I will say that most of the time, most of the people that I meet in that particular worldview, they still want what's best for African Americans. I think a lot of it is education. A lot of us need to be educated. None of us know everything. And we have a lot to learn from each other. If we accept that and sit down and talk. And like I said, I'm not trying to convert you to Christianity, but we got to figure out what's going on with this community. You know, we got to figure out how to fix this. We got to figure out how to create a situation where 3-year-old babies aren't being killed and nobody's going to jail, you know? And the fact that it happens. And I guarantee you, I'm not even going to prophesy. I know you don't believe in prophecy, but I can guarantee you next weekend, it's going to be more the same. We're going to have more mothers crying. And more people talking about how bad it is and nothing being done.
Let me tell you, fam, you know, because, you know, also being on top of being an atheist, I also practice Nichiren Buddhism. And the organization that I'm part of, that is the lay organization Nichiren Buddhism, is the Soka Gakkai International, SGI. And the second president, Jose Toda, said this. He said, if you want to know the future, look at the causes of today. With that being said, is that what is the definition of insanity? What's the definition of insanity?
To do the same thing to expect a different outcome.
And we're not going to actually get a different outcome if we're constantly doing the same thing. You know,
I said that at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean,
this thing with George Floyd.
You because what you said about, you know, we got another weekend coming up, the 4th of July weekend. Not me, like, you know what I'm saying, and it's warm, you know. And people gonna be and of course, like, you know, these people are gonna be defending their corners again, because they know on a warm summer day, you know, that's where they can, that's their money, and any person that's impeding on their money is gone, you know.
And let's be clear.
Whoever is in the crossfire of that,
they don't care.
Casualty. They're a casualty.
And let's be clear about this, Cynthia. The Mayor Lightfoot, she had said that she's going to have police sweeping corners. And I'm going to put this out here. I saw black activists in Chicago, a few of them, I'm not mentioning their names. Oh my God, this is when the left is playing black folk again. ACLU's mad constitutional right. Okay, first off, constitutional rights are not unlimited. There are no unlimited rights. There's no unlimited right to bear arms, no unlimited right to speech, no unlimited right to assemble. There are a balance. Your rights balance with mine. Now we have situations in these communities where the rights of people, inalienable rights, those are the foundational ones: life, liberty, property. We want these people to live. So your right to assemble, which is in the Bill of Rights, one of the amendments, doesn't trump the inalienable rights. So the mayor coming around saying, get off them corners, all right? I'm sorry. People, can black folk, will y'all please stop acting brand new to me, for me too, because I be seeing black folk. You know what's going on the corners. You know, ain't nobody just sitting there, you know, just reading poetry. Okay, we know what's going on. So y'all want to get upset, talk about, oh, they're locking up black men arbitrarily. First off, they're not locking up nobody. They're telling you to move. And those who want to stay, they do need to get locked up, because why is you staying? What is you on? We know good and darn well that you not on that. We know why you're there. So I get tired of black folk acting brand new, acting like, well, they should be able to be at the corner. Look, man, come on, we know what this is. And these are our children that are dying out here. These are black children that's dying out here. Black mothers, black fathers getting killed. Whatever, if you just stay off the damn corner this weekend. And then if the police will push people off the corner, more power to the police. Because that's what they should be doing. That's what law enforcement should be doing, is making sure that you're not doing those illegal activities there. You know, well, I was just walking by. Okay, well, they ain't just gonna come and snatch you up. It's keep it moving. Now, if you want to start an argument with the police, then you might get locked up. But if you just keep it moving, you should be fine. But as far as if you come back to that same corner, should be. Don't get me wrong, because you know we got to balance that too. Because we don't know we're gonna get that like we're gonna get the Laquan McDonald cop to just shoot a black man for walking away. You know. So don't get me wrong. I understand. Don't get me wrong. I understand why black folk don't trust law enforcement because and law enforcement needs to understand this. Law enforcement, you need to become part of the communities that you serve. You need to understand the people. Cynthia, I told somebody once that if I became a police officer in Chinatown, that I would expect that I would need to learn some Chinese. And I would expect that I would need to learn something about Chinese people. You know, different customs, what offends them, you know, what, you know, and get to know the community, maybe visit a couple of their churches or their temples and get to know people, let them know I'm the police and I'm here for you because I'm not Chinese. Everybody agreed with me on that, right? Everybody agreed. And I said, well, why don't you think you need to do that if you're coming from Schaumburg and you get dropped off in Inglewood? Why don't you think you need to learn something about that? And at that point, they looked at me like I was speaking in tongues. It was hard for them to get the neurons together to make that connection, but I kept forcing them to make that connection. And that's what I'm talking about, because at the same time, while we do need these brothers off these corners slinging their rocks or whatever they're slinging, we also need for the police to be, we can trust you that you're not going to kill our black boys just because you're scared of black men, that you are actually going to do your job, and hey, you need to keep it moving and not getting your feelings when someone say no and jump out with a gun and shoot them. You know, because at this point, nobody knows. I mean, honestly, statistically speaking, most police officers are not going to do that. But here's the thing. Being a police officer is not like, you know, if statistically speaking, I'm not going to get your order wrong most of the time at McDonald's. I'm going to make that quarter pounder right. And if I don't, what's the harm? I ask for no pickles, you send it back. As a law enforcement officer, most of the time I'm doing my job right. But one time I just shoot you because you're black. There's a lot more to risk in the police, so that we have to really lower that percentage of when you mess up. All right, because that ends up with somebody dead. And like I said, if law enforcement wants the African American community to trust them, then the law enforcement needs to be the one to step out and actually engage the African Americans. Stop talking to us about Blue Lives Matter. All right. Don't get me wrong. I believe police officer lives matter. All right.
But there's a line, people.
But please don't. We're saying Black Lives Matter. Well, Blue Lives Matter too. We didn't say they didn't, man. You know what I'm saying?
Nobody's response. We don't need that.
Right. The fact is, you're paid, you're sworn, and you have taken the oath to serve and protect the people of the state of Illinois as an officer. So you need to engage the people of the state of Illinois. Whatever community you work in, you need to get to know the people in that community. That makes your job actually easier, honestly speaking. If you get to know the people in the community, then you know who's on something anyway. You know when you go to that corner clear, you know that's Ricky. He live around the corner. He's coming from the corner store. But I know where you from. You from 2 blocks down, and you a BD, and you over here. You know that. You know. But otherwise, you don't know who you're looking at. We all look the same, right? That's basically how it is. So. There's two sides of that. Stay off the corners. Law enforcement, keep your cool, be professional, and treat people with respect, even when they're in the wrong. That's all I got to say about that. I'm gonna leave it alone.
I think that it goes back to when you all did the interview some weeks back with your friend Officer Anthony.
Officer Broadway.
Officer Broadway. When he said that, you as a police officer are sworn to keep the peace. That is your ultimate swearing in when you acquiesce to take this position. And I think that that's definitely something that is very much so a disconnect when we are talking about policing overall, which again goes back into another system that has been been ravaged when it comes to systemic racism. And we're definitely going to have a multi-part conversation where we can really break down the different systems. And I think that would be very good we can shine a light on our next show. And with that said, since we were talking about speaking in tongues, should have come in a Nissan, leaving in a Honda. Get back Cadillac. Again, everyone, thank you for tuning in to the 13%. Again, we are your hosts, Cynthia McDonald and Richard Graves. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel, YFNA News. And also hit the bell, get the notifications every time that we go live. Also, please pay attention to the show notes. We do have Patreon, and you can also buy us a coffee so that you can support this channel. And we want to thank all of our patrons, Marsha Ortega, BestName Ever. Do we have any more? And that's it. So again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. And if you actually become a patron, we'll read your name off of the air too. Right. And until that, family, next time, be easy breezy, lemon squeezy. Enjoy your 4th of July. Be safe, be healthy, and be well.